The memory was a shard of ice embedded in her heart, one that 2 years of lonely survival had failed to melt. It was the memory of his voice, King Theron's voice, echoing in the vast throne room, each word a hammer blow shattering the fragile vessel of her hope. She had stood before him, a trembling slip of a girl with hair like spun snow and eyes, the pale pink of a winter sunrise, her omega nature, a whisper in the presence of his overwhelming alpha power. He was the Shadow Wolf King, a legend cloaked in power and darkness, and the Moon Goddess, in her infinite and cruel wisdom, had decreed him her mate. An albino, he had said, the words laced with a cold disgust that had flayed her soul bare. He had not been looking at her, but at Lord Valerius, his high counselor, whose lips were curled in a smug, satisfied sneer. Her wolf is weak, her eyes are flawed. The omens Valerius spoke of are true. She is a curse, a weakness I will not allow in my bloodline. Salira had flinched as if struck. Flawed, cursed. The words were not new. She had heard them whispered her entire life in the Blackwood Pack, where her pale form had been seen as an ill omen. She was an orphan, a burden, a ghost haunting the edges of pack life. But to hear it from him, her fated mate, the one person in the entire world who was supposed to see her, to complete her, it was a death sentence. "You are rejected," he had declared, his silver eyes finally flicking to her, devoid of warmth, devoid of anything but dismissal. "I, King Theron, sever any bond the goddess may have mistakenly forged. You are banished from the Shadow Wolf territories. Be gone by moonrise, or my wolves will have you." She had not begged. She had not cried. The shock was a sheet of ice, encasing her, holding her upright. A guard had gripped her arm, his touch rough and impatient, and had dragged her from the throne room. The last thing she saw was Lord Valerius whispering in the king's ear, a triumphant glint in his eye. The great wooden doors had boomed shut, sealing her fate. That night, she had fled, not just the capital, but civilization itself, with nothing but the thin tunic on her back and the shard of ice in her heart. A blizzard had descended, as if the sky itself were mourning her rejection, and she had stumbled through the blinding snow, convinced she was walking toward her grave. Now, 2 years later, the blizzard was not just a memory, but a roaring reality outside her small, isolated cabin. The wind shrieked like a banshee, hurling handfuls of snow against the single, grimy window pane. Inside, the world was small and warm, lit by the flickering glow of a tallow candle and the gentle heat of a small, well-tended hearth. The cabin was her sanctuary, a fortress of solitude built with her own hands in a forgotten valley deep in the untamed northern mountains, far beyond the reach of any pack territory, far beyond the reach of a king's cruel decree. A small sound, a happy gurgle, drew her attention from the storm. She looked down at the bundle of furs nestled in a basket by the fire. A tiny hand, perfectly formed, reached out from the blankets, grasping at the dancing firelight. Salira's heart, that frozen and shattered thing, swelled with a love so fierce and hot it threatened to consume her. "Varric," she whispered, her voice soft from disuse. She reached out, her own pale fingers gently enclosing his. He was her secret, her treasure, her reason for surviving the blizzard, for learning to hunt and trap and forage, for building this life from the ashes of the old one. He was a perfect miniature of the man who had cast her out. He had the same thick, dark hair that defied taming, and when he opened his eyes, they were the same startling, impossible silver. He was the king's son, a prince born in exile, his existence unknown to the world, and most especially to his father. Sometimes, in the dead of night, she would allow herself to feel the phantom ache of the broken mate bond. It was a dull, constant throb, a reminder of what she had lost, of the wholeness she would never know. But then she would look at Varric, at his sleeping face, and the ache would be replaced by a wave of ferocious, protective love. He was hers. Theron had rejected her, but the goddess had given her this gift. He was all that mattered. The storm raged for 2 days, trapping them in their little haven. Solera rationed their dwindling supply of firewood and smoked meat, her anxiety a low hum beneath the surface of her calm. The isolation that was usually her shield now felt like a cage. If the storm didn't break, their supplies wouldn't last. She had to hunt. On the 3rd morning, the wind finally died, leaving behind a world buried in a pristine, deadly blanket of white. The silence was profound. Solera bundled Varric tightly, his warmth a small comfort against her chest, and strapped him to her back. She grabbed her short bow and a quiver of hand-fletched arrows, her worn leather boots crunching in the deep powder. The air was bitingly cold, stealing the breath from her lungs. Her pale eyes, so sensitive to bright light, were a torment in the glare of the sun on the snow. She squinted, her vision blurring at the edges, a constant reminder of the flaw that had cost her everything. She tracked a set of rabbit prints for nearly an hour, moving with the quiet grace of a creature born to the wilderness. The trail led her toward a dense copse of ancient pines, their branches heavy with snow. As she neared the edge of the woods, a scent hit her, coppery and sharp on the clean air. Blood and wolf. Her entire body went rigid. Rogues? They rarely ventured this far north, but the storm could have driven them from their usual grounds. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced her. Her first instinct was to turn, to flee back to the safety of the cabin, to protect Varric. But the scent was wrong. It wasn't the foul, mangy smell of a rogue pack. It was singular, powerful, and mixed with the clean, masculine scent of pine and winter frost. It was a scent that tugged at something deep within her, a half-forgotten chord of memory. Against her better judgment, curiosity warred with her fear. She unslung her bow, nocking an arrow, and crept forward, her steps silent. She rounded a massive, snow-dusted boulder and stopped dead, her breath hitched. Lying in a crimson-stained drift was a wolf. But it was no ordinary wolf. It was a monster, a creature of midnight and shadow, larger than any she had ever seen. Its fur was the color of a starless night, thick and coarse. One of its legs was bent at an unnatural angle, a shard of bone protruding through the skin. A deep gash ran along its flank, sluggishly weeping blood that sizzled faintly on the snow. The faint, acrid smell of wolfsbane hung in the air. He was dying. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was an alpha, a powerful one. He should have been, surrounded by his pack, not lying alone and dying in the snow. Her mind screamed at her to run. An unknown alpha, wounded and desperate, was the most dangerous thing in the woods. He could lash out, kill her and Varric in his death throes. But then the great wolf's head lifted, a movement of pure agony. His eyes met hers. They were silver, the same impossible, startling silver as her son's, the same silver that haunted her dreams. The world tilted. It couldn't be. Not here, not now. The scent, the size, the eyes. It was him, King Theron. For a heartbeat, a vicious, ugly part of her rejoiced. He was dying. The man who had shattered her world, who had called her a curse and cast her out to die, was now getting what he deserved. Let him freeze. Let him bleed out. It was justice. But as he collapsed back into the snow, a low, pain-filled whine escaped his throat. It was a sound of utter defeat, of a great power laid low. On her back, Varric stirred, awakened by the sound, and let out a small, questioning whimper. Solera looked from the dying king to the child on her back, the child they shared. Could she let her son's father die? Even a father who didn't know he existed? Even a man who had been so cruel? The shard of ice in her heart seemed to crack. The compassion she thought had been frozen out of her long ago welled up, hot and painful. He was a living creature, suffering, and he was, whether she liked it or not, a part of her son. She couldn't just leave him. "You foolish, foolish girl," she muttered to herself, her voice a harsh whisper. She lowered her bow. The decision, once made, settled in her with a heavy certainty. She was going to save the man who had tried to destroy her. Getting him back to the cabin was a Herculean task. He was immense, a dead weight of muscle and bone. Salira was strong from years of hard living, but this tested her to her absolute limit. She fashioned a crude travois from fallen pine branches and strips of leather from her pack. It took her over an hour of grunting, straining, and near tears to haul the unconscious wolf onto it. Varric, sensing her distress, began to wail, his cries sharp in the frozen silence. "Hush, little one, hush," she soothed, her words coming out in ragged puffs of white. "It's all right, Mama's here." The journey back was a nightmare. The travois snagged on roots and rocks hidden beneath the snow. Twice, she lost her footing and fell, her body aching with the strain. Her muscles screamed, and the cold seeped into her bones, but she gritted her teeth and pushed on. Every time she looked at the magnificent, broken creature she was dragging, a confusing maelstrom of pity, anger, and a strange, unwelcome sense of connection churned within her. By the time she finally dragged him over the threshold of her cabin, the sun was beginning to set, painting the snow-covered peaks in hues of orange and pink. She was utterly exhausted, her body trembling with fatigue. She gently unstrapped a sleeping Varric and laid him in his basket, tucking the furs snugly around him. Only then did she turn her full attention to the king. He lay on the floor near the hearth, a giant dark stain on her small, orderly world. The smell of his blood and the wolfsbane poison was thick in the small space. She knew she had to act fast. Wolfsbane was a killer, and the infection from his wounds would do the rest. She stoked the fire until it blazed, then put a pot of snow on to boil. With a heavy sigh, she knelt beside him. This close, the sheer power radiating from him, even in his unconscious state, was breathtaking. She could feel the thrum of his alpha energy, a deep bass note that vibrated through the floorboards and up into her own bones. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt familiar, like a song she'd forgotten she knew. "All right, Your Majesty," she murmured, her voice dripping with a sarcasm only she could appreciate. "Let's see what we can do about this mess you've gotten yourself into." Working by the flickering firelight, she began the grim task of cleaning his wounds. She cut away the matted, blood-soaked fur around the gash on his flank. The flesh beneath was torn and angry. Using a clean rag and the hot water, she carefully washed away the blood and grime. He didn't stir, his breathing shallow. The broken leg was worse. The bone needed to be set. She had set broken bones on animals before, but never on a creature of this size and power, and never on a shifter. She knew that if she did it wrong, she could cripple him for life. Taking a deep breath, she found her small store of medicinal herbs. She ground poultices of comfrey to aid the bone and yarrow to fight the infection, mixing them with a little bear fat. As she worked, she talked. The silence of the cabin, usually a comfort, felt oppressive. The words just started spilling out, a torrent of loneliness and pain she hadn't realized she'd been holding in for 2 long years. "You have no idea, do you?" she said to the unconscious wolf, her voice thick with unshed tears. "You sit on your throne, wrapped in power, and you break people like they're twigs. You broke me. You threw me away like trash." She gently, carefully, applied the poultice to the gash on his flank. His skin was hot to the touch. "I almost died in that storm. I wanted to. It would have been easier. But then I found out about Varric." She glanced over at the sleeping baby, her expression softening. And I knew I had to live. For him. I built this place. I learned to be strong. Not for a pack, not for an alpha, but for my son who has your eyes. Her hands moved to his broken leg. This would be the worst part. I hate you for what you did, she whispered, her voice raw. I hate you for making me feel so worthless. But I can't let you die. I don't know why. Maybe it's for Varric. Or maybe it's because no one deserves to die alone in the snow. Not even you. With a sharp prayer to a goddess she no longer trusted, she gripped his leg, found her purchase, and pulled. There was a wet, grating sound of bones sliding back into place. The wolf's body went rigid, and a deep, guttural growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, even in his sleep. Solira's heart leaped into her throat, but she held firm, her hands shaking, as she quickly and efficiently splinted the leg with 2 flat pieces of wood and more leather strips. Sweat beaded on her forehead. She sat back on her heels, breathing heavily. It was done, the worst of it. Now all she could do was fight the poison and wait. She spent the rest of the night brewing a detoxifying tea from burdock root and milk thistle, gently prying his powerful jaws open to trickle the bitter liquid down his throat. She changed his dressings, kept the fire roaring, and watched. As the first pale light of dawn crept through the window, she finally allowed herself to rest, slumping into a chair, her body a single, comprehensive ache. She had done all she could. The rest was up to him and his own legendary strength. She drifted into an uneasy sleep, her dreams filled with silver eyes and the memory of a cold, cruel voice. She awoke to a sound that was not the crackling fire or the sigh of the wind. It was the sound of a man's groan. Her eyes snapped open. The massive wolf was gone. In his place, lying on the floor, was a man. He was naked, his body a tapestry of scars, both old and new. The crude splint was still tied to his leg, the poultice still on his flank. He was lying on his side, his back to her, but she could see the fall of raven-black hair and the breadth of his shoulders. It was him, King Theron, in the flesh. He groaned again, a low sound of pain and confusion, and tried to push himself up. "Don't move," Solira said, her voice sharp and brittle. "You'll tear your stitches." He froze. Slowly, carefully, he turned his head. His silver eyes, hazy with pain, and the lingering effects of the poison, widened as they focused on her. Recognition dawned, followed by a wave of complete and utter disbelief. "You!" he rasped, his voice rough. He stared at her pale hair and eyes, at the determined set of her jaw. He looked around the small, rustic cabin, his gaze taking in the drying herbs, the neatly stacked firewood, the general air of impoverished but orderly survival. His eyes landed on the basket by the fire. At that exact moment, as if on cue, Varric stirred. He let out a soft coo, then a louder cry, demanding his breakfast. Theron's gaze snapped from the basket to Solira, then back to the basket. A storm of emotions crossed his face, confusion, suspicion, and then a dawning, horrifying comprehension. He pushed himself up onto one elbow, ignoring the flash of agony that it caused him. He had to see. Solira moved instinctively, placing herself between him and her son. "Stay back," she warned, her hand reaching for the skinning knife on the table. "The child," he said, his voice a low growl. "Let me see the child." Before Solira could refuse, Varric, tired of waiting, pushed himself into a sitting position in his basket. He blinked his wide, sleepy eyes, his tuft of black hair sticking up at an angle, and he looked directly at the strange, large man on the floor. Silence descended upon the cabin, thick and heavy. Theron stared at the boy. The boy stared back. There was no denying it. The child was the spitting image of him, the same dark hair, the same strong jawline, even in its infant softness. And the eyes were pure, undiluted silver, his silver. Theron's own eyes, the eyes of a king who had seen everything, widened with a shock so profound it seemed to shake his very soul. He did the math. 2 years. He had banished her 2 years ago. This child he was nearly 2. A cold dread, colder than any blizzard, washed over him. Varric, who had never seen another man besides his own reflection in a pail of water, tilted his head. He felt no fear. This man, this large, wounded man, felt right. He smelled like home, like the furs he slept in, like his mother. He felt like the other half of himself. He lifted a small, chubby hand, pointed a finger at the king, and spoke one of the few words he knew, a word Celira had never taught him, a word that must have been encoded in his very blood. "Dad," he said, his voice clear and piping in the silent room. The word struck King Theron with the force of a physical blow. "Dad." The skinning knife fell from Celira's nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor. Theron's face, already pale from blood loss, went ashen. He stared at the child, then his gaze shifted to Celira, and for the first time in 2 years, he truly saw her. He saw not a curse, not a flaw, but a woman of impossible strength, resilience, a mother, the mother of his son. The guilt that crashed down upon him was a physical entity, a crushing weight that stole the air from his lungs. What had he done? As if summoned by the sheer force of the emotional upheaval in the tiny cabin, a new sound intruded. The thunder of hoofbeats, the barking of wolves. Many of them. They were getting closer. Celira's blood ran cold. The king's guard. They had found him. She snatched Varric from his basket, holding him tight against her chest, her body a shield. The front door of the cabin was thrown open, and a tall, stern-faced man in the black and silver livery of the royal guard stood silhouetted against the bright snow. His eyes, hard as flint, swept the room, widening in shock as they took in the scene. His naked, wounded king on the floor, and a wild-looking albino woman clutching a child. "Your Majesty!" The guard, Gideon, breathed, rushing forward. Several other guards packed the doorway behind him. Theron held up a hand, stopping him. He did not take his eyes off Celira and the child in her arms. The dormant mate bond, severed by his pride and cruelty, was roaring back to life, a supernova of sensation inside him. It screamed at him, a chorus of agony and regret and a desperate, clawing need. "Mate, son, his, Gideon," Theron said, his voice raspy but imbued with an authority that could not be questioned. "This woman and this child are under my personal protection. They are to be treated with the utmost respect. She is your queen." The silence that followed was absolute. Gideon and the other guards stared, their faces a mask of stunned confusion. A queen? This outcast? And the child, whose silver eyes were a perfect match for the king's? Celira felt the world spin. Queen? After everything? It was a farce, a nightmare. She looked at Theron, at the raw, agonizing regret in his eyes, and she felt nothing but a cold, terrifying dread. This wasn't a rescue. It was a capture. He hadn't come for her. He had come for his heir. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, clutching Varric so tightly he let out a small protest. "No, you can't have him." Theron's expression softened, the hard lines of the king giving way to the raw anguish of the man. "Celira," he began, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "We need to talk." He tried to rise, but his injured leg gave way, and he collapsed back with a sharp hiss of pain. The movement broke the spell. Gideon and another guard rushed to his side, helping him sit up, their faces etched with concern. "My king," You are gravely injured. We were tracking the rogues who ambushed you. We found happy bodies a mile back. They were torn apart. But we found your trail, the blood. We feared the worst. Gideon explained, his voice strained. He glanced at the expertly splinted leg and the clean dressing on Theron's flank. His gaze flickered to Salira, a flicker of grudging respect in his eyes. You did this? Salira just stared, her mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Theron had been ambushed. She had saved his life. And now he was here, in her home, her sanctuary, calling her his queen. It was too much. The walls of her carefully constructed world were crumbling. She saved my life, Gideon, Theron said, his voice gaining strength, when I was left for dead. Now, get me something to wear, and have the healers prepare the royal carriage. We are taking my son and his mother home. The word home sounded like a threat. The journey to the palace was a surreal ordeal. Salira was bundled into a carriage so large and opulent it felt like a room, with velvet-cushioned seats and glass windows. She sat stiffly in one corner, Varric asleep in her arms, while Theron, now dressed in a simple tunic and breeches provided by his guards, lay on the opposite bench. Gideon rode alongside, his face a stony mask, the silence inside. The carriage was thick with unspoken words. Salira refused to look at him, keeping her gaze fixed on the snow-dusted trees flashing past the window. She could feel his eyes on her, a heavy, searching gaze that made her skin prickle. The mate bond, reawakened and raw, was a live wire between them, thrumming with his regret and her terror. Salira, he finally said, his voice quiet. She did not respond. She held Varric tighter, her knuckles white. I know that nothing I can say will change what I did, he continued, his voice laced with a self-loathing that was profound. But I need you to know the truth. I need to try and explain. She remained silent, a statue carved from ice and fear. Lord Valerius, Theron said, the name a curse on his tongue. He had been my father's advisor, and then mine. I trusted him. When our scouts reported your presence in the territory, Valerius began to spin his poison. He brought me old texts, twisted prophecies. He said your albinism was not a simple quirk of birth, but a demonic mark. He said you were a harbinger of ruin, a curse sent by our enemies to infiltrate my court and weaken my bloodline through a fated bond. He paused, swallowing hard. I was young, arrogant. I was so obsessed with the idea of a strong heir, a perfect lineage, that I listened. I saw your flaw and not your spirit. I saw a prophecy and not a person. I saw a weakness, and I was a fool. A cruel, blind fool. Salira's breath hitched. So it wasn't just her. It was a lie, a manipulation. It didn't erase the pain, but it shifted its source. The king's cruelty had been born of deceit. A small, treacherous part of her felt a flicker of something other than hatred. But she quickly snuffed it out. It didn't matter why he did it. He had still done it. And now? She finally spoke, her voice a croak. Now you have seen your heir. Is that it? You want your son, so you will tolerate the cursed. Mother? The bitterness in her voice was a corrosive acid. Pain flashed in his eyes. No! Salira, no. When I woke up on your floor, when I saw you, I felt the bond. It was like I'd been living in a gray world and suddenly the sun came out. And when I saw Varric, when he called me, I didn't just see an heir. I saw my son, our son, and I saw the woman who protected him, who saved him, who saved me. Your compassion, your strength, you survived what I did to you, and you still had it in you to save my life. You are not a weakness, Salira. Your heart is the greatest strength in this kingdom. His words were a balm on her wounded soul. but she couldn't let them in. It was too dangerous. Hope was a trap. "Words are easy, Your Majesty." "I know," he said, his voice heavy. "That is why I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you, with actions. I am not asking for your forgiveness. I have not earned it. I am not even asking you to accept the bond. That is, your choice and yours alone. All I am asking is that you let me try. Let me be a father to our son. Let me protect you both. Let me earn back a fraction of what I threw away." They arrived at the palace, a sprawling fortress of black stone and high towers that seemed to touch the sky. If she had been intimidated before, she was petrified now. As she was escorted through the gates, servants and guards stopped and stared, their eyes wide with shock and curiosity. Whispers followed her like the rustling of dry leaves. "The albino Omega. The curse. She's back. And she has a child." Theron had her and Varric installed in a suite of rooms adjoining his own. They were larger than her entire cabin, filled with soft rugs, a roaring fireplace, and a bed so large it could have slept 10. Healers came and tended to her, noting her calloused hands and the lean, wiry strength of her body with surprise. They fussed over Varric, who took all the attention with wide-eyed wonder. Solara felt like a wild animal in a gilded cage. The luxury was suffocating. The respect she was shown by the staff, on the king's explicit orders, felt false. She spent the first few days in a state of high alert, barely speaking, watching Theron's every move with suspicion. He was true to his word, patient. He did not push. He did not demand. He would simply appear at her door for meals, inviting her to eat with him in the small, private dining room that connected their chambers. He would talk to her, telling her about his day, about the kingdom, asking for her opinion on trivial matters. At first, she gave clipped, one-word answers. But slowly, tentatively, she began to respond. His focus, however, was on Varric. He was a natural father. He would spend hours just watching him play, his face a mixture of awe and heartbreaking regret. He would get down on the floor, despite the pain in his leg, and let Varric crawl all over him, pulling his hair and patting his face. The joy on Theron's face when Varric laughed was so pure, so genuine, that it chipped away another piece of the ice around Solera's heart. She found herself watching them, a strange ache in her chest. This was what a family was supposed to be. This was the life Varric deserved. Could she deny him this, out of her own fear and bitterness? One evening, about a week after their arrival, Theron found her staring out the large window, looking down at the city lights. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he said softly, coming to stand beside her. "It's big," she replied, her voice small. "I feel lost." "You are not lost," he said, his voice firm. "You are home." He hesitated, then added, "Lord Valerius has requested an audience. He returns to the capital tomorrow. He is demanding to know why I have brought a dangerous omen into the heart of the kingdom." Solera's blood ran cold. The thought of facing that man, his smug, cruel face, sent a wave of nausea through her. She instinctively wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't want to see him." "You won't have to," Theron said, his voice hardening. "But I must. This ends. The lie he built ends tomorrow. I will not have you or our son living under the shadow of his poison any longer." There was a promise in his voice, a promise of retribution that was both terrifying and, to her surprise, deeply reassuring. The next day, Solera couldn't settle. She paced her rooms, a nervous wreck. Theron had asked her to be present, not in the main throne room, but in a small screened alcove to the side, where she could see and hear without being seen. He said it was her right to witness it. After hours of internal debate, she had agreed, bundling a sleeping Varric and holding him close as her only shield. The throne room was exactly as she remembered it, vast, cold, and intimidating. But this time, she was not the one standing in the center of the floor. That position was occupied by Lord Valerius. He stood tall and proud, his robes immaculate, his face a mask of righteous indignation. "Your Majesty," Valerius began, his voice booming with false concern, "I come before you as your most loyal servant, to beg you to reconsider this folly. The court is in an uproar. The people are frightened. You have brought the cursed one, the albino omen, into our very midst. And she has a bastard child with her. This is a disaster for your reign, a weakness our enemies will surely exploit." Theron, seated on his throne, was utterly still. He listened, his face impassive, as Valerius ranted, listing all the reasons Solera was a danger, a curse, a blight. He spoke of the prophecies he had interpreted, the bad harvests and harsh winters he had blamed on her existence. From her alcove, Solera trembled. Every word was a fresh cut on her soul. She clutched Varric tighter, burying her face in his soft hair, trying to block out the hateful voice. Then, Rovan stepped forward, the young, handsome alpha from her old pack, the one who had been her intended, her first love, before the king's claim had superseded all others. After her banishment, he had risen quickly, becoming an envoy. He had come with Lord Valerius. Seeing him there, standing beside her tormentor, was another betrayal. "Lord Valerius speaks the truth, my king," Rovan said, his voice smooth and ambitious. He hadn't seen her in the alcove. "That Omega was always trouble, weak, unfit. My pack was glad to be rid of her. Whatever game she is playing, whatever lies she has told you to win your favor, you must not listen. Cast her out again. I will. I will take her, if I must. She was almost mine once. I can handle her." He smirked, as if offering to take a troublesome dog off the king's hands. That was the final straw. A low growl rumbled in Theron's chest, a sound that vibrated through the stone floor. It was not the growl of a man. It was the growl of a king, of the shadow wolf, and it promised death. "Handle her," Theron repeated, his voice dropping to a lethally soft purr. He rose from his throne, and the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. His alpha power rolled off him in suffocating waves, pressing down on everyone in the room. Guards shifted uneasily. Rovan's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of confusion and fear. Lord Valerius's eyes widened. "You dare," Theron whispered, taking a step down from the dais. "You stand in my hall and speak of handling your queen?" Rovan paled. "Queen, my king! Surely you jest. She is a worthless, rejected. She is my fated mate," Theron roared, and his voice was the sound of an avalanche. His power slammed into Rovan, who choked and stumbled back, his eyes wide with terror. "The one the goddess chose for me, the one this snake," he pointed a trembling finger at Valerius, "convinced me to cast away with his lies and his twisted prophecies." Theron was now standing directly in front of Valerius, who for the first time in his life looked afraid. "You spoke of a curse, old man. You spoke of weakness. Let me tell you of strength. The woman you called a curse survived 2 years alone in the deadliest wilderness on this continent. She built her own shelter, hunted her own food, and when your hired rogues left me for dead, poisoned and broken, she found me. She, with her weak wolf and flawed eyes, dragged my body back to her home, and she saved my life." A collective gasp went through the assembled court. "You speak of her bastard child?" Theron's voice dropped again, shaking with rage. He strode to the alcove and pulled back the screen, revealing Solera, pale and trembling, clutching Varric. He gently took his son from her arms and held him up for the court to see. "This is no bastard," he thundered. "This is Varric, my son, my heir. The proof of a bond so strong that not even my own monumental stupidity could fully break it. Look at him. He is the future of this kingdom." The court stared, mouths agape, at the child with the king's black hair and silver eyes. The truth was undeniable. Theron turned his furious gaze back to Rovan. "You called her worthless. You, who would have been her mate, saw nothing. You are a fool. You are less than nothing." He unleashed the full force of his alpha command. "On your knees!" Rovan cried out as if his legs had been kicked out from under him. He crashed to the floor, prostrate, trembling and whining like a beaten pup. Then Theron faced Lord Valerius. "And you are a traitor. You manipulated your king, endangered the throne, and nearly destroyed the greatest gift I have ever been given. Your lies end today." He turned to Gideon. "Gideon, strip this man of his titles and his lands. He is no longer a lord of this kingdom. He is an exile. Throw him out of my city. If he is ever seen in my territories again, he is to be killed on sight." Valerius's face crumpled. "My king, no, please. I did it for you, for the strength of the bloodline. You did it for power," Theron snarled. "And now you have none. Get him out of my sight." Guards seized the sputtering, pleading Valerius and dragged him, along with the groveling Rovan, from the throne room. Silence reigned. In the quiet aftermath, Solira began to cry. The sobs racked her body, tears of pain, of relief, of 1,000 emotions she couldn't name. The shard of ice in her heart had not just cracked, it had melted, washed away by a flood of catharsis. She watched as Theron, her king, her mate, stood before his entire court, holding their son, having defended her honor and declared her worth to the world. He came to her, his silver eyes soft and filled with a love so profound it took her breath away. He gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "It's over, Solira," he whispered. "The lies are gone. You are safe. You are loved." That night, after Varric was asleep in his own small room, tucked into a cradle carved with the royal seal, Theron found her on the balcony of her chambers. The anger of the day had passed, leaving behind a quiet, fragile peace. "I know I have no right to ask," he began, his voice hesitant. "But the bond, I feel it, Solira. It calls for you. It begs for you, but it is your choice. It will always be your choice. I will be his father, and I will be your protector, no matter what you decide. But my heart is yours, if you will have it." Solira looked at him. She saw the king, the shadow wolf, the most powerful man in the world. But she also saw the man who had been humbled, the father who adored his son, the mate who was consumed with regret and a desperate, beautiful love. She saw her other half. The fear was still there, a faint tremor in the deep, but it was overshadowed by a new, blossoming feeling. Hope, trust, love. She had been broken, but he was piecing her back together. He had been the one to shatter her, but he was also the only one who could make her whole. She reached up, her pale, slender hand cupping his jaw. His skin was warm. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch as if he were a starving man and she was his first meal. "My whole life I was told I was a flaw," she said, her voice clear and strong, no longer the whisper of a frightened omega. "A curse. You believed it too. But today you showed me that my flaw doesn't define me. My heart does. And you saw that. You finally saw me." She took a step closer, rising on her toes. "I choose you, Theron," she whispered, her breath ghosting across his lips. "I choose this. I choose us." And then she kissed him. It was not a kiss of desperation or command, but a kiss of choice, of acceptance, of coming home. Sparks, real and tangible, ignited between them, a torrent of magic and light, fire and lightning. The mate bond, frayed and damaged, snapped into place, whole and complete and unbreakable, flooding them both with a warmth and a joy so profound it felt holy. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her flush against him, kissing her back with all the pent-up love and regret of 2 lost years. It was a promise, a vow, a prayer. Their official mating ceremony was held a month later, under the light of a full moon. Solira stood beside her king, not as a cursed Omega, but as his cherished queen, her pale hair shining like a silver crown, her unique eyes filled with a newfound confidence. Varric, held in his father's arms, watched the proceedings with his own bright, silver eyes. She was no longer Solira the outcast, the rejected, the flaw. She was Solira, the Shadow Wolf Queen, a ruler whose greatest strength was not power or dominance, but the boundless compassion of a heart that had been broken and had learned to heal. Her rejection had not been an end, but a detour, a painful path that had, against all odds, led her to her true destiny, standing as an equal beside her king, her family whole, her future bright, loved and valued at last.